The date is January 23rd, 2016. Dele Alli has just scored one of the goals of the season, a sensational volley at Selhurst Park against Crystal Palace, and as such is being touted as one of the best English prospects in a generation. The following few years saw phenomenal growth for the youngster, culminating in arguably his peak years as a professional at just 22 years of age at the 2018 World Cup, in which he was an integral cog in England's march towards the semi-finals. Unfortunately though, it has been a steady descent from there. So what happened to England's golden boy? Well, since 2019, Dele Alli's form has declined rapidly. Having not made an England appearance since then, a time when he should have been approaching his true peak years, some have questioned his commitment, with former Spurs boss Jose Mourinho labelling him as lazy in the Amazon documentary All or Nothing, Tottenham Hotspur. But a recent candid interview with former Manchester United right-back and current Sky Sports pundit Gary Neville has revealed that Alli's issues run far, far deeper than anyone would have ever imagined. So far, in fact, that his perceived decline in form now seems understandable. To understand what happened to Alli's career, we need to go all the way back to his formative years. Speaking to Neville, Alli revealed that inside he was losing the battle before explaining trauma is trauma. Now, on the surface, many people will look at a man in Dele Alli's shoes and expect that someone with the bank balance he has should be able to get on with life. A glimpse at social media will show plenty of callous comments suggesting that he's nothing to be depressed or traumatized about. However, these people clearly haven't listened to Alli's interview and do not understand the extent of what he's been through. Neville sat down with Dele to get to the bottom of what's going on in his life and try to understand where he was at a mental point of view. But it's safe to say he probably wasn't prepared for the bombshell the former MK Dons player was about to drop. Alli revealed that right now he's actually in the best headspace he's been in years, which is why he decided to bear all. Having just completed a stint in a mental health rehab facility after a failed loan spell in Turkey, Dele decided that although he was scared to talk about what had happened to him, it was the right thing to do. Early on in the interview, Alli tells Neville a lot of things that happened to him that he just could not understand, before adding that he would do stupid things which he blamed himself for. No one could have predicted what would come next. Dele was overly candid in his admissions, as he informed Neville that he had misused alcohol in the past and also been addicted to sleeping tablets, a problem which has been reported on before amongst Premier League players. However, Alli's issues and reasons for his substance misuse ran somewhat deeper. In an explosive revelation, the ex-Tottenham man revealed that he was holding on to feelings from his childhood that he simply could not tell anyone. After being adopted, the young Dele would often be encouraged to speak about what was going on inside, but he would simply cry and bottle it up. Like a lot of victims of abuse, Alli didn't want to talk. He wanted to work through his issues himself, which is understandable when you learn what he went through. His issues began as a child, something which was briefly highlighted a few years ago as he dropped his surname from the back of his shirt in a bid to distance himself from his biological parents. At the time, he took a bit of heat from various people around the internet who claimed he was looking for attention, or that he was coming across as a little Hollywood by just using his first name, something usually reserved for Brazilian players. However, after revealing that, as a 6-year-old, he was molested by his mum's friend, you begin to understand why he was eager to drop the family name. Dele explained that his mum was an alcoholic and his abuser would regularly appear at the house, at which point both Dele and Neville appeared visibly upset, understandably. He then went on to explain that shortly after, he was sent to Africa to learn discipline, but from the sounds of what he said, it was his parents who needed lessons in discipline. He then went on to explain that at age 7 he began smoking, and by 8 he was selling drugs, having been manipulated by an older person in the neighbourhood who had told him that kids wouldn't get into trouble for doing so. At this stage in the interview, Alli was visibly shaken and didn't appear in the least bit comfortable, but he really should be commended for his bravery in speaking out about things which have clearly caused him so much distress. Shortly after, he revealed that he'd been hung off a bridge by a man from the next estate, but didn't go into details of why or what the events leading up to that incident were. This in itself is enough to scar an 11-year-old, but when you factor in the previous abuse he suffered, then you begin to realise just how much baggage he's been carrying around with him for so long. At the age of 12, and with very real prospect of professional football somewhere down the line, Dele moved in with the family of one of his MK Dons youth teammates, Alan and Sally Hickford. Never legally adopted by the family, he was at least away from the traumatic experiences he'd been subjected to by those who were supposed to be there for him. Between the ages of 12 and 16, he experienced the only real period of normalcy in his entire life. As we've discussed, his early childhood years were extremely chaotic, and making your professional debut at the age of 16 also brings with it a huge amount of hype, so those 4 years spent with the Hickfords were almost certainly his most stable. At various points in the interview, Dele comes across as emotional and clearly embarrassed. He even reveals that he isn't doing this for people to feel sorry for him, which Neville assures him people will not think. A difficult watch from start to finish, the interview shows a human side that we simply aren't used to seeing from modern-day footballers. Too often, fans of the game fall into the trap of putting players on a pedestal and just assuming their lives are perfect. I mean, the obscene amount of money average players are paid doesn't help their cause in this regard, but we should remember that each and every player has had a childhood before fame, which is different for everyone. Dele Alli's is clearly one of the more extreme examples. Throughout the interview, Dele showed poise and humility, and at one point even explains that he doesn't blame his mother at all. For someone who's been a victim of abuse at the hands of someone so closely connected to their mother, to talk this way is truly remarkable. Many people, completely understandably, would want nothing to do with the person who had allowed something like that to happen on their watch. Neville also probed into Dele's time in Africa, which he described simply as horrible. As you can probably imagine, moving from a fairly affluent part of England to a developing country would bring with it certain challenges, which for a young boy travelling there alone to live with his father was probably magnified exponentially. He also explained how the culture change was difficult for him to deal with, so ultimately he didn't last long in Nigeria before he was sent back to England. Years later, as he was beginning to make his waves in the English game, Dele's adopted family came under fire from his biological parents, who claimed they were trying to take their son away from them. They were also accused of only being in it for the big contracts, as he was on the verge of signing. Of course, it doesn't take a genius to see the correlation between Dele's newfound status as a professional footballer and his biological parents suddenly coming crawling back out of the woodwork. Dele, rather unsurprisingly, could see exactly what his parents were doing, and thankfully didn't fall for it. For a person in his position to speak out about past traumas and to normalise the act of seeking help is a refreshing stance on an age-old problem. Back in the day, footballers were seen as hard men, and emotions and feelings simply weren't discussed. Nowadays, this archaic mindset is gradually changing, and it is because of players like Dele Alli summoning the courage to seek help and speak out. This can only be perceived as a good thing. Following his harrowing revelations, Dele experienced what can only be described as an outpouring of support from his fellow professionals around the game. He did not have to do what he did, and by speaking out, he was hopefully given others who have had similar horrific experiences during their formative years the confidence to go and seek help. Ali suggested that he's now in the best place he's been in for years mentally, and will now head back to Everton in a bid to resurrect his faltering career. Whether or not he can rediscover the form he showed in the early part of his career remains to be seen. But one thing is for sure, most people will be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt if he does go through a bit of a dip in form, considering what he's been through. Dele Alli's is a cautionary tale. We never truly know what someone is going through, and just because a Premier League player's had a bad game doesn't mean that we, as fans, should instantly get on their backs. Ali does have the ability and the potential to get back on track, so it'll be interesting to see where he goes from here. Whether a relegation battle with Everton is the right thing for him right now, who knows? It could be exactly what he needs to regain that fire in his belly and prove to everyone that he still has what it takes. Where do you see Ali's career going? As usual, thanks for dropping in today, and remember to hit subscribe for some more interesting bits and pieces next time. Bye guys.